Well, as the strains of our opening music fade into the distance, welcome once again to FYI with Barry ZeVAN, and it's a joy today to welcome Rick Morgan, who is an attorney with Bowman and Brooke here in the Twin Cities, and has an incredible career, just a giant in the legal profession.
I'm blushing, Barry, but thank you for having me on the show. It's an honor to be here.
You're welcome. My honor, my pleasure. You have, first of all, I think people, since this is law-oriented on the show, this program, I have always wanted to be an attorney. In my secret life, I always thought that would be a great profession, but was never able to pursue it.
You did just fine.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. But first of all, what you're from near the New York City area, Suffern, New York. I've driven through there many times, and it's a beautiful part of the west side of the Hudson River. But what prompted you to want to go into the law business?
It's interesting. It's such a wonderful profession. You get to help people with their problems and help them through some crises, and companies through things they go through. But the genesis of it was when I was a young man. My dad was in a very bad car accident, was very badly injured. And it was very interesting to watch that process play out in court. And the case didn't necessarily end in the way that we would have liked as a family. And it really gave me an interest in the legal process and how those things work. And as a person who was interested in law, very interested in writing and speaking, maybe I could do a better job. And so I had a very strong desire from an early age to be an attorney, and I was very blessed to be able to make that dream come true.
Oh, amen. What a blessing. What a blessing for your clients, too. And I just, when you got into law school, was it more challenging than you thought it might have been, or not? It
was one of the most intellectually challenging times of my life. I had had a wonderful undergraduate education, and so I was pretty well prepared. But what was great was that the professors with the Socratic method really caused you to think through not only your arguments, but the other side's arguments. It's a wonderful way. They almost rewire your brain in a way so that you can see both sides of the argument and equally be able to articulate either argument. So when I'm looking at a legal problem, I've got to think about how best to present the case for my client, but also how my opponents are going to attack that. And frankly, it has a lot of value outside of the profession, but it can drive a lot of people crazy too, because you do tend to see both sides of a question if you're doing your job right.
Yeah. So your first law firm, was that in the New York area, or?
Well, my first practice when I graduated, I went to the University of Minnesota Law School and got a wonderful education there. I added another year at the Humphrey Institute of Public Affairs, it was called then, and got my master's in public affairs. I've always had an interest in public affairs and politics. And then my first actual law firm was, I had gone to college, undergrad, on an ROTC scholarship. So I had the privilege of serving my country for 4 years on active duty in the Army as a lawyer. So that was a lot of fun. So my first law firm was the United States Army.
My goodness. What's the difference between being a military attorney and a civilian attorney?
Well, the first thing, if you're a military attorney, you're dressed in, and especially in the Army, you're dressed in green all the time. So you don't have much of a choice in wardrobe. But seriously, the most significant difference is that when you're in the military, and as a prosecutor, which is what I was for most of my military career, you're representing the United States of America. So the importance of that and making sure things are done right, as important as it was to get justice and to make sure the bad guys went where they belonged. As a prosecutor, you have an incredible responsibility to make sure when you're bringing charges, that has an incredible impact on the person who's being charged life, even by being charged, much less going through trial and potentially to jail. it's life-changing and can be devastating. You have to get it right. That's why we have proof beyond a reasonable doubt in criminal cases. But when you're representing the United States, you have an extra responsibility to make sure you're exercising good judgment. And it was very sobering to me. I mean, there I was in my late 20s, suddenly with this type of responsibility in a very large geographic area for the Army. I was the lead trial attorney. So I would be traveling around that area, doing court martials, and I had a wonderful, wonderful staff. And as any young officer in the Army will tell you, you're as good as your sergeant. And Sergeant Hawkins, who is a dear friend and was a tremendous resource for me, kept me on the straight and narrow, made sure I did things right.
Well, I have no doubt about you doing things right.
Okay.
That's for sure. The fact that you are a prosecutor and you're trying to make sure somebody gets their due. Recently, there have been questions regarding Attorney General Sessions and this and that and the other in this current judicial climate, shall we say. Does any of that bother you? Does it bother the legal profession that perhaps the legal profession is being attacked sometimes, or that some of it's justified?
Sometimes it is justified. I mean, it is a very difficult profession, and when you're dealing with tough cases and tough issues, it is not uncommon to get some blowback. I can remember as a federal prosecutor for many years, we would bring cases, and sometimes you would get negative publicity. The importance is when you're in the process of investigating, working with your investigators, it is absolutely critical that you're making sure that you're putting the case together, the nuts and bolts of the case, the themes of your case, in a way that's not only consistent with law, but is, you're trying to basically try to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And that is just as important. Because the conviction, if you get a conviction and don't do it the right way, you have improper evidence. You use witnesses in an improper way. It's completely uncalled for and unjustified. Now, I don't know of any of that with relation to the current Department of Justice, but what I do know as a prosecutor, you have a very high ethical standard and a very high standard of proof to meet, and you need to be very careful about that. It is not unusual that you will bring a case and then have some negative publicity about that. But if you've done the right thing, you can bear that.
Wow. Have you ever taught law?
Yeah, at the University of Minnesota, I was an adjunct professor for 5 years, and basically teaching some of the students there how to stand up and deliver in court. And it was a wonderful experience. I really enjoy and still do enjoy doing teaching from time to time, and sharing experiences and hopefully not too many boring war stories. It's been very gratifying. Many of the students I taught, and it's been a number of years, have gone into very successful careers here as trial lawyers in the Twin Cities, and it's I'm very nervous about running into one of them in court, to tell you the truth.
I love it. I love it. You've been with the firm Bowman and Brooke for a long time, and your primary clients are the automobile companies. Is that correct?
The Bowman and Brooke firm is really one of the lead firms in the country in representing the automotive industry. So Mr. Bowman had a tremendous reputation in some of the earliest, what we call crashworthiness cases in the 1960s. And so the idea that a firm based in Minneapolis would be representing an industry that at that time was based mainly in Detroit was remarkable enough. But Mr. Bowman was a man of great vision, and he also reached out to Japan as those Japanese auto companies began to make inroads in the U.S. markets, and really developed a wonderful stable of attorneys to do that. I joined the firm in 1995 as the firm was trying to broaden its scope beyond the automobile industry, and I had a good reputation as a trial lawyer for my years as a prosecutor. And Mr. Bowman showed a great deal of confidence in me in bringing me on as a partner and saying, let's see if you can develop business outside the automotive industry. So I've really concentrated my career in consumer products, the chemical industry, and in commercial practice, dealing with disputes between companies. And it's been very gratifying. There's so many wonderfully talented attorneys at our firm, to be able to work with them, develop them, mold them into teams, and then to take some of our wonderful clients and represent them around the country. So in any given year, I'm in probably 30 different states dealing with cases, and get into court as much as I like. And I have wonderful, wonderful people who support me, and I have a wonderful assistant, Ellen Hansen ZeVAN, who makes sure I keep things straight, and so I'm very blessed.
Yeah, and she's retiring the end of January.
I'm doomed. I'm doomed.
Oh my! Well, this will be seen in perpetuity, so she can watch that and no, she created your doom, God forbid. Regarding civilian cases, did they differ quite a bit from the military cases, or basically were they the same?
You know, it's really about caring, and it's about relationships. If you think about representing companies as opposed to the United States, I mean, it's still a matter of caring about the case enough to do it the right way. Mm-hmm. It's still about developing relationships with your clients, so you understand their culture, you understand their business needs. There's nothing I'm going to do in court that's worth hurting their business, mm-hmm. whether it's because the case is costing too much, or you get a bad result, or it's something that's inconsistent with their business goals. So the important thing is to make sure that when I get a case, we're working it up, evaluating the case so we can correctly see whether this is a case that we should be trying. Is this a case that we should be seeking to settle at an early stage? Is this a case we should make a point and go ahead and try it? So my job is to exercise judgment and help the company work through those type of decisions, and if they decide to drive ahead, to make sure I have the most cost-effective strategy to get to their business goal. So it's very gratifying, because you start feeling you're not really part of the business, but you feel like you're helping them achieve their business goals and taking really knotty problems that's causing them a headache or an upset stomach or sleepless night, and I'm able to help them deal with that problem. It's very gratifying.
What is the parameter for elevating a case to bring it to either the state Supreme Court or the U.S. Supreme Court?
Well, you know, it really depends on what happens at the trial court. You know, what happens is you can either win the case, you lose the case, and you bring it up on appeal. The joke is, you know, the appeals court comes along after you've had the battle at the trial court, and they execute the survivors. But what really happens, sometimes you will go through a proceeding in a trial court and really think there's been some error in the way the judges handle it, or the other side has done something that shouldn't have been allowed, and you take it up to the appeals court. And you know, in Minnesota, we have a wonderful court of appeals and a Supreme Court led by Chief Justice Lori Gilday, which does, you know, from my point of view, a wonderful job. But I get around the country, and when you're looking at things that go to the Supreme Court, there are things, you know, where two federal circuits, our federal circuit courts, have a disagreement, and the Supreme Court tries to resolve that. That's ordinarily how those cases get, and it's a very rare case that gets there. Very few cases are tried, fewer cases are appealed, and then to get to that ultimate level appeal of it is highly unusual. So, you know, as you go through, you know, your cases, you carefully evaluate and think through, as you're preparing for trial, how an appellate court might rule on something, and you try to anticipate that and try to make it so there aren't appealable issues, because the longer that case goes on, the more expensive and uncertain it is for your client. So obviously you want to do your work at the trial court level to minimize the possibility of a bad result in appeal.
Understood. You're no stranger to television. You hosted a show on TPT here in the Twin Cities called Face to Face for 5 years, and you actually succeeded a fellow who's now a congressman from the 2nd District here, Jason Lewis, former broadcaster as well. So what was it nerve-wracking to to start that process?
It was a wonderful program. It was on for a number of years on TPT, and it was really a Minnesota nice version of Crossfire. So you would have a person of a more conservative bent, a person of a more liberal or progressive bent, and we would have guests, and we would talk about the issues of the day. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me. I had been a guest on the show, and must have done okay, because when Jason decided he was going to go back into radio more full-time, I was asked to step in on the conservative side. So I had a wonderful time. I was paired with David Lillehog, who was a former U.S. attorney. He had been my boss at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He's now a state Supreme Court justice and doing a wonderful job over there. So it was kind of fun to argue with your boss. And we had a marvelous time for 5 years doing that. And it was excellent for me. I got to meet so many wonderful people in all sorts of walks of life involved in Minnesota, whether it was in public policy or in areas of social concern, dealing with the issues of the day. It really was a good education. And Barry, you know this. You've been in this business for a long, long time. And as a lawyer, it really helped hone my communication skills. The idea of making a point and making it quickly really did help me actually in dealing with clients and in court and dealing with jurors.
Yeah, well, Father Time certainly is part of this business.
Yes, it is.
You actually too, aside from the law, even though you've been here in Minnesota for many, 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 many years, you're still a baseball fan. Tell us about that.
Well, I love baseball. I enjoyed playing it, although not very well. And I had the pleasure of coaching each of my sons in the Eden Prairie Youth Baseball League, which was just still is a wonderful organization. I have so many good friends and good memories. And of course, as your audience will know, Eden Prairie has some good athletes. And so I really did have my pick. I mean, several of the players I work with are now in the minor leagues and doing quite well. Wow. It's very nice, and it was very gratifying. The most important part, though, was making sure the kids I coached had fun. And I was with a group of guys who were coaching together, and we did it for a long time. I was the bench coach, so it was my job to make sure the scorebook was right and make sure that the rules were followed. They had a lawyer on the staff who were going to follow the rules and make sure the kids were loose and having a good time. And we had a wonderful experience. I did that for about 13 years and really enjoyed it.
Wow. So sorry the Yankees lost for you. Of
well,
course,
you know,
of course we lost to them, so maybe we're not too sorry, but what can we say?
And I really enjoy going to Target Field and rooting for the Twins. I have to tell you, though, as a native New Yorker, when the Yankees are in town, you know, I do root for them. And it was very tough this year. They lost in 7 games to the ultimate world champions, the Houston Astros. And I was very much hoping that this would be one of my bucket list items, is getting to a World Series game at Yankee Stadium. It hasn't happened yet. This was supposed to be the year, so I'll have to wait at least another year.
Yeah, well, we'll root for you.
Well, not against the Twins.
Not against
please.
the
Not
Twins.
against our Twins.
Yeah. Maybe they can both win.
Well, I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Back to face-to-face. And comparing it with Crossfire, and for those in the audience who are not familiar with Crossfire, it was a phenomenal talk show with a panel and people arguing and back and forth, but in a different way. What's your opinion of how these programs are today? I'm a big fan of MSNBC and CNN, and I watch almost too much. But I'm interested in what's happening today. But what gets to me is the sad part that the moderators can't sometimes control people talking over each other all the time. And when you try to hear the response from somebody on a panel, somebody jumps in and then another person jumps in and you don't hear a thing. I watch Morning Joe too. Yep. And it drives me crazy.
It is odd. I can remember one of the things I liked about face-to-face, even though we would disagree, we were not disagreeable, and everybody got to state their case, and it was done in a very respectful way. I think in that way, it was maybe even better than Crossfire, because everybody got to state their positions, and there was none of this negativity. Mm-hmm. And I think what happens now, and of course, because we were on Channel 2, it wasn't really ratings driven, right? Yeah. So I think what happens now, the political discourse has gotten a little more bitter, and I think it's more difficult, and you do have people talking over each other. I don't know if that is driving ratings in a positive direction or not. Sometimes that is the basis of it, but I do know that it's hurt our public discourse. We have people talking in sound bites, not making sustained arguments, seeing things through an ideological lens, not trying to see the other person's point of view. And I think it's hurt our public discourse. It's very depressing. We tend to, people who, again, people can choose to watch what they want. We don't want to get caught in that bubble, whether it's MSNBC or Fox News or whatever your preferred channel is. The idea that we need more critical thinking, more listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should be listening twice as much as we talk. And to see more of that in discourse, not on TV, but in our public discourse would be welcome. It's gotten very bitter and very divisive, and it's unfortunate.
Has that infiltrated the courtroom?
Well, the courtroom is, you know, again, it's a war by words. But you know what, there are rules in place, there are standards of conduct in place that if somebody, they call them Rambo litigation tactics. So if somebody's engaging in that, I mean, that is not going to be well received. So, I mean, you can go ahead and you clash and you can have disagreements in court or in the proceedings leading up to court. But the good news is there are rules of evidence, there are rules of procedure, there are norms and ethical rules that really do cause people to at least try to do the right thing or put them into patterns where you know, both sides are going to be heard.
Yeah. So in essence, it hasn't affected negatively what goes on as either a prosecutor or the other side.
I think there's, you sometimes hear that it's affected it. I really haven't seen it. I think it's because of the rules of procedure and the rules of evidence and the ethical rules, it's constrained. It's constrained a little bit more, which is good. Which is good because in a legal proceeding, you know, as a lawyer, you do need to see both sides. And it's always good for me to hear what the other side's going to say because I can't be effective unless I understand both sides. One
of the people from the Twin Cities, Stephanie Sengupta is her name, and her father, Tom Sengupta, is a wonderful man. He's on the Democratic side, but Stephanie has been the executive producer of Law and Order almost from the beginning.
What a wonderful franchise!
All of the Dick Wolf shows having to do with law, and she's now executive producer of Criminal Minds. And she is an attorney herself. He was wise to hire her. She has degrees from, I think, both Harvard and Yale in law. And her mother told me she can bat out a script in 2 minutes, in 2 days, 2 days for a script. And of course they shoot every week, so this is something else. But do these shows, law shows, you and I were discussing Boston Legal, which was one of my favorite shows as well.
One of my favorites too.
And but are they accurate? Are they accurate?
Well, no. I mean, it's like anything. I mean, it's telescope for dramatic effect on television. So some of the things you see I have never seen in a courtroom, and but on the other hand, it gives you a flavor for the drama that can occur in the courtroom, for the high stakes that are often played for in a courtroom. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, the entertainment value, of course, when you're actually in court representing actual clients, entertainment value is not what it's about. It's about getting a result. But for those of us who are in the game and enjoy it and love it, it is high drama and it is a lot of fun. It's a fun day when I'm in court.
Stephanie is here in town once in a while. I would love to have both of you on this show to talk about the differences between a TV drama and real drama in the court.
Well, it's true. I mean, to shape it for television, you know, you have to telescope things. You have to, you know, if you had to lay the foundation on television for the exhibit, you're going to lose your audience. So it has to be telescoped and it has to be heightened for dramatic effect, and that's perfectly appropriate.
Is it ever, excuse the naivete, but is it ever that dramatic in an actual courtroom proceeding where people are either yelling or they're pressing the person on the witness stand to break down or something of that nature? Is it ever that intense?
It can be. I had one case as a federal prosecutor where there was a fellow who was pretending to be a CIA operative, And he was defrauding people by saying, I had contracts to execute people for the CIA, which of course is bogus, and I would get paid and I'll give you the money. He actually got people to pay him for that fraud. So we did our investigation very carefully with some wonderful agents at the FBI, and it turned out that if he was actually an operative, he would actually get into a uniform and go to different places and pretend that he was an actual military Air Force officer. And we found out that he was doing these trips with a woman who was not his wife. And of course, if you were really on that kind of a mission, that probably wasn't a very good thing to do. So we found this lady, we talked to her, and I agreed not to put her on the stand, but I would just bring her into the courtroom. So I was cross-examining this fellow and asking him, his name was Murray Evans, and I was asking him about this life he was leading and about how the importance of secrecy, and you wouldn't want to compromise the secrecy. And then I brought her into the room, and he broke down on the stand. And needless to say, unfortunately, she was sitting behind Mrs. Evans, who was none too pleased. So you can have those, that's a very minor example, but you can have that kind of impact, and that certainly got the jury's attention.
Wow.
Because I had him say, this is the lady you would go on these trips with.
Wow.
And he admitted it. And that was the end of that case.
Yeah,
he went away for a number of years.
Incredible.
So you can have that kind of drama, but the ordinary case, you certainly want to capture the jury's imagination. You want to make sure that they understand your case, and you want to make sure that they care, that as jurors they're engaging with your case and caring. And it's not always that kind of dramatic moment where you break down the person on the stand, but it's that careful buildup of themes and evidence that leads the jury to adopt your position and become your partisans. And that's the joy when you're giving a closing argument. You've done your job well, and that jury is with you, and you can tell. You lean forward, they lean forward, and you know you've captured their minds and their hearts, and that's very effective.
You've done that for us today, and I can't thank you enough, Rick, for giving us some great information and educating us about the law. And as I say, I can never thank you enough. It's wonderful.
Barry, thank you so much for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
My pleasure, sir.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And right now I want to mention my book. It's on Amazon. But I do want to say also that recently I was interviewed by Sue Ellen Zagrabelny here at CCX, and I forgot to mention the name of one of my most important, wonderful friends and somebody who helped me so much, Robert Goulet. And I inadvertently did not mention Robert being one of the most important people in my life. And sometime, well, maybe on the next show at the end, I'll tell you about it. But indeed, the late Robert Goulet was a phenomenal human being, a wonderful man to me. Thank you so much, and I hope we see you next time here on FYI with Barry ZeVAN.
Looking for local? Even more local? CCX Media gives you the option to connect with your community on multiple levels. CCX Create welcomes you, community residents, to connect and experience television in an exciting way. The free TV classes we offer will have you on your way to creating TV, and our wide variety of content can be watched at home or on the go. Connect to what's happening in your community. Visit ccxmedia.org.